the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, this is not Nick Oswald welcoming you to this Bitesize Bio webinar, but Tom Warwick, content creator at Bitesize Bio. Today we have a live episode of the Happy Scientist podcast. If you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist, you're in the right place. With me, as always, is the Bitesize Bio team's Mr. Miyagi, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. In these sessions, we hear from Ken mostly on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. And along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist. If you have any questions, put them into the questions box on the side of your screen and I'll put them to Ken. Today, we'll be discussing how to motivate yourself in scientific research.
All right. Well, Tom, I'm sure glad you're here.
Thank you.
Because in this topic, how to motivate yourself, I'm an expert on that. In scientific research, I need a little support. So here you are. So I refreshed myself on your LinkedIn profile and your resume, and I saw something and I thought, he's a structural biologist. That's really cool. I wonder what that means. So maybe you can give us your potted bio.
Okay, yeah, well, at the minute I'm content creator here, so I create and edit a portion of the written copy you see on Bitesize Bio website and that we put out. But in a past life, as Ken says, I was a structural biologist, which basically means trying to elucidate the 3D structures of biomolecules. I did this via X-ray crystallography, but you can do it by microscopy, which I'm sure a lot of our audience is familiar with. So this is like the 3D structures of proteins, membranes, you name it, basically. And it was quite the challenge. It was quite grueling, but there's some amazing technology.
Cool. Okay, I noticed too that you mentioned being a chemist, which I've also noted a lot of biologists seem to be afraid of chemistry. So the fact that that you are an expert on both at once, that's also quite useful.
Sure it is. That was quite grueling too. It was a long time ago, but yeah, I've retained some of it and it certainly comes in handy now.
Right.
Useful as a structural biologist as well, to sort of have a chemical understanding of biosystems.
Sure, that makes sense. So, folks out there, you may wonder, like, well, what happened to Nick? Well, nothing happened to Nick. Nick is fine. It's just, as Tom pointed out, he is involved in a lot of content creation, but he's also involved in some of the content you see that announces this podcast, for instance. And so he often does the intros that you see in print, based on notes I gave him. Well, for this particular one, what he wrote was better than what I sent him. And I thought, this is interesting. Then he commented that this is a topic that he's personally passionate about. And I'm like, well, that does it. Nick, you're sitting this one out. Tom's got to come on the podcast with me so we could talk about this. So that's what we're going to do today. And we will have a little back and forth from our different perspectives, and hopefully you will find some things that you can take away that will help you. So our last episode, we talked about what if your love of science is starting to wane, and that is something that'd be worth looking back to if that's true for you. This is kind of the next step after that. Let's presume you've rekindled your love for science, but you still got to actually get in there and do it. So how do you motivate yourself to do this hard work? And it is hard. Yeah, it may not be, backbreaking, but it's definitely mentally hard. And that matters. And so we want you to keep doing it because so many of you have invested so much time in education and in the lab, and that would be a great loss for the industry, for mankind, if you stop doing it. We want you to keep doing it. So we're going to talk about ways that you can motivate yourself and keep yourself in the game and keep yourself at your highest possible level. So I want to start with the idea of tell the story. You're doing interesting things that many of the rest of us aren't doing. And it's why, someone like me can ask someone like Tom, like, what does it mean to be a structural biologist? I don't know. That's kind of interesting. I want to know about that. And you're also a chemist. How is that possible? You might look at that and go, well, who wants to hear about that? But people do want to hear about it. And so start telling people what you're working on. And you will find some people, their eyes glaze over or they just go, oh, that's all over my head. Like they don't even want to try to understand it. But other people won't do that. And they will go, wait a minute, this is new to me. I would like to know more. Now that may be, people in your family. That may be, people at the coffee shop. You can definitely engage with people who are outside of science, and it's not a bad idea for you to tell people like that what you're up to, because you have to simplify it, because you have to boil it down, and you learn a great deal yourself when you're teaching others. And granted, you're not trying to get them up to being your peer, but it is useful to get them engaged enough to know, hey, what this guy does is useful and it matters and it's helpful. And you'll get that feedback from people, and that feels good. And that can be motivating. So when other people are interested in what we do and are impressed with what we do. Now, on top of that, it's not just the people that don't know what's going on that you talk to. Talk to the people you're working with. The people that are engaged in what you're engaged in also have insights, and there can be an interchange of encouragement, as it were. So you want to keep people that are on your team or adjacent to your team engaged and involved, and that's good for you and it's good for them. And the notion of it being motivating to them is also useful, because it's not just about you. You are in a collaborative environment, and so you can give energy to others, but you can also receive it from others. And there's the rising tide floats all boats, right? Now, another thing you can do is, maybe it's not just talking about what you're working on now, but talking about what you've worked on before. And especially if you've got some kind of success story, or you had some kind of eureka moment. Those don't happen every day. And so when they do happen, they're really special. So you want to recapture those moments and relive those moments, because that'll remind you, oh yeah, this is why I worked so hard to get to this point. This is why I stayed up all those late nights in university. And this is why I come into the lab early, because this kind of thing can happen. Another group of people you can talk to are things you can talk about are things that are prospects for the future. What future research might you be involved in? What possibilities are there? Now, maybe it's not funded yet. Maybe you don't have a grant for it. So that's not sure. But if you start talking about things, then they start to become real. And if you don't talk about things, they don't become real. Everything starts as a thought. Any tangible thing in your life started as a thought in somebody's head, and maybe a thought in your head. Maybe some things that you have now are because you had a thought and you just kept going with that. So you should spend some of your time engaged in things that are not yet there, but will happen in the future or could happen in the future. And so whoever you're talking to about this stuff, listen also. When people have questions, respond to them, give them answers, and understand some people are going to ask stupid questions because maybe not stupid, ignorant questions, let's put it that way, because they just don't know. Other people, their questions will help you gauge their level of attention right now. If they're asking questions like, well, I just told you how that works, or I just told you that part. Well, now you don't have their attention yet. And now, granted, you can blame that on them, or you can look at yourself and say, am I doing a good job of communicating this? Because I want to be fully engaged. If I'm fully engaged, again, that'll help me motivate myself, and we can go forward. So another way of looking at this is if you're talking about people are insiders, fellow scientists, that you're talking to. Well, obviously you want to engage with them on a deeper level than you would with a relative or a friend that's not in the same field. But even among scientists, they can be in different fields, and so I'm sure you're engaged with some scientists that are not exactly in your field. You may be a specialist in your area. Well, they don't know everything about what you're doing then, but at least they have a foundation that you can build on. So take advantage of that, make use of it. It's like what Tom was talking about earlier, that understanding chemistry is useful for structural biology. Well, that makes sense. And if he's talking to somebody who has understanding of one or the other, he can use that as a bridge to help explain things. And again, every time you are engaged in a conversation, you're building your own motivational muscle. You're part of it. And at some point, you're going to go, okay, it's time for this conversation to end and for me to get back to the lab and get this thing moving forward. So you want to go that way, and and use these things as tools. You can look at this and say, well, I'm just faking myself out here. I'm just manipulating myself. Like, yes, you are. And why not?
Just to jump in there, Ken,
yeah,
there are always tangential benefits to what you're doing in your research. And during my PhD experience, I was massively demotivated at times, but now looking back, it's clear to me that the chemistry benefited, the structural biology benefits what I do now, and I couldn't be doing this job without those. And that's really easy to see in retrospect, but I wish I could have thought upon that more at the time rather than just get quite glum and down about my research. So it's something it's something worth thinking on, and I think that can be motivational too.
Right. Well, yeah. So there's two parts of this. There's do you bother to think about it? But then will you take action on those thoughts? So sometimes it's just in your own quiet moments you have to realize, oh, I gotta get myself more in the game. But other times you jump in and just start telling people about stuff, and you'll find not only do you engage them, you engage yourself. So you see, you said something interesting there a moment ago about being demotivated, and that is an interesting word, because it implies that you used to be motivated, and then you had a moment where you're demotivated, where your motivation has been taken away. Well, that's worth examination. When they're like, what happened? Why now? Why at this moment is my motivation lacking? What's changed? And sometimes you look at that and go, well, I'm just overworked right now, or I'm just tired, or this particular thing, I actually never was motivated about it. It's good to recognize the difference, as opposed to when this used to excite me and now it doesn't. So that self-examination and that bothering to be aware of your own state is really, really valuable. And if you're constantly feeling demotivated, there may be something structurally wrong for you. Something that you need to address in your life. And maybe there's some health issues to look at. Maybe there's some mental health issues to look at. But maybe it's just, I got to stop sleeping 4 hours a night. I got to stop eating out of the vending machine, because everything else can be perfect. And you wonder, why am I demotivated? Well, it's because you don't feel physically good. So be part of the game. Go to the gym. It's amazing the difference those things that seem totally outside of what you're doing can matter.
It's true. When I was in the lab, I met friends who encouraged me to do enormously healthy habits, stuff I wouldn't normally do, largely being outdoors. Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say that, because it was when they left, I guess, that's when it got harder. So, just looking at the people around you as well is or appreciating the people around you is something
Yeah, well,
that we can
those are
benefit from.
two useful topics. Sometimes you can't choose the people that are around you. You've been assigned a team, and you got to work with who you got. But other times you can go, you know what, this person at every turn is just a downer. All they see is problems. All they do is complain. All they do is find fault. Well, if you can remove such an influence from your life, by all means do so. Sometimes though, you can help that kind of person. Maybe they're complaining because they're tired, or they're not getting some of the same good advice you got from your friends. Well, maybe you can share that and help lift them up too. So yeah, I realize the topic we're talking about today is about how to motivate yourself, but motivating others can also motivate you, because you tend to start to believe your own story, which is good if it's a positive story. So another thing you can do is you can look at, well, where has science been working out, and things that have worked, succeeded, new things have been discovered. If you can re-excite yourself by examining those things. What is it I could be doing that like what has been done before? And there's lots of places to look for that kind of inspiration. There's so much that has been written about science and in science and from science. I mean, there's tons to draw. So you can start with just academic works. When you really dig into something else that has succeeded, that it is tangential to what you're doing, or maybe it precedes what you're really currently working on, well then you can say, man, I want to be a part of this. I want to be the guy that discovers that next thing, or figures out this next thing. Another thing that I always felt was interesting, my whole life, is to look at biographies of people who have done the kind of things you would like to do, and see what happened in their life. And often when you examine those biographies, you realize they had downtimes. They had things that went wrong. They had opportunities snatched away from them. And yet they kept pushing, and they worked through those things, and they made it happen. Now, you may also find too that there are some nonfiction works out there that they're not maybe academic level, they're just kind of a fun level. But there are some great scientists who have written accessible books that can be read by anybody. Well, for you, it could be just a guilty pleasure, because if somebody's writing about quantum physics and you're familiar with that, if somebody's writing about cell biology for the masses, you may look at that and go, well, I know all that stuff. But to have somebody talk about it in an engaging way and in a simplified way, it's just easy for you to consume. And again, it reminds you of all the fun stuff. And when something that is written, they can pack in a lot of stuff because they're not giving a lot of explanation. So they can go, well, there's this, and there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. And it reminds you of all the things that got you interested in all this in the first place, and that have motivated you in the past, and you can reuse your motivation. It's not like you have to every day get up and go, okay, why should I do this today? Well, you can do it for the same reason you did it yesterday. It's fine. Go ahead and use those things. Another interesting thing you can look at is fiction. Like, fiction, how can that help? But there's tons of fiction out there that is science related, science adjacent. Shoot, there's science fiction. Again, it's motivating. And some of the stuff is so fanciful and fantastic, it reminds you of how much blue sky is left out there. It's like, man, we are not done with this. There is plenty more to do, plenty more to learn, plenty more to discover, and why not be part of it? So, in addition to all that, think of all the other media that we have available to us. Get on Netflix. There's tons of documentaries that are scientifically focused, and they're interesting. And then, of course, there are whole movies that get into topics, and I mean, some of them are, Jurassic Park fanciful, but others they may be historical, they may be at least based in history, and those things can be very interesting too. And then we realize I could be part of this. They could be making a movie about me in the future. Wouldn't that be cool? So why not? Why not engage yourself in what's available about where science has been working out before? And even some of the dystopian stuff can be interesting because there's things to learn from it. So it comes down to your taste, of course.
Sorry, just to jump in there, Ken.
Yeah.
Again, I go one step further. You say dystopian, but sometimes we can find ourselves wondering, what's the point, especially when our work is often focused on such minutiae. And then you mentioned Netflix and social media, and I often found engaging with content that I disagree with, that can be really inspiring as well. If you think something contradicts or takes a shot at something you hold dear, whatever topic, that sure as hell makes you realize the benefit of what you're doing. Yeah. And I think that's ever more true, in the age of disinformation.
For sure. And too, it can also point out, here's a problem I want to solve. And some of these dystopian themes have been, here's what happened when they didn't bother to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. I was recently a guest on another podcast called The AI Optimist with a good friend of mine, Declan Dunn, and we'll link up to that at some point here too. The notion of being an AI optimist is a little contrarian these days. There's been a lot of talk about the dangers of AI, but he is looking at it from the standpoint of, well, how do we make good use of it? Not just, not to ignore the warnings or not see the potential dangers, but what good can we use this for? How can we push things forward? And should we even use AI at Bitesize Bio for some, that helps us with some of the content we create? So it definitely can be used for good. We can still be aware of the bad. And the same thing is true of everything y'all are doing. Science is often dangerous. I mean, and even if it's, in biology, you're dealing with living things and things that can die that you may not want to die, So even at that level, maybe you don't have any feelings about that bacteria in that petri dish, but you still don't want it to die. So we can be engaged in that way also. So another thing to think about is you have a social circle, and science is a very collaborative way of operating in life. And that's not true of every industry or every business. Collaboration is a big deal for y'all. And, sometimes I'm almost afraid to use the word social anymore because people automatically finish it with media. But I'm not talking about social media. I'm talking about actually being social. Now, that's not to say you can't be actually social on social media. But when you have opportunities to interact with other people that are engaged in the same kind of things that you're engaged in, you can draw on their excitement, and you can leapfrog each other on things that you've learned by sharing those moments of inspiration and those moments of the eureka moments, as it were. There's great opportunity there just with your peers. And it may be peers that you actually physically get together with, people that in the same lab or something like that. There may be people you see at conferences. Maybe you don't see them all the time, but you get to see them. But there are other people you may never actually be in the same physical place, but because we've got all this great connectivity, you are interacting with. So use those interactions to help keep yourself motivated. So there's one other thing that I want to talk about in the end, and that is the idea of mentorship. A mentor can really help you that way because they've been down this road. They've had high points and low points. They know what happens and they know how they got out of them. So you should take advantage of that. And maybe they're available in your lab or in your company. But they're also curious and creative people just like you. So they know the environment and they've built skills, you know, both at the bench but also in the environment of science. They deal with the same they've dealt with the same problems you've dealt with in the past, the culture of the field of your lab itself. You know, they have figured some things out and they can share them with you. And sometimes just getting that pressure off you, your motivation was already there, you just needed to not be under so much pressure. And it frees you then to then go, okay, I don't have to think about the politics here right now. I can just focus on what I'm in researching, what I'm investigating, and that makes things so much better for you.
And with mentoring as well, it's a good opportunity to look back and reflect on what you have achieved rather than what you've got left to achieve. Often the focus on what's coming up, what's next. What do I need to experiment do I need to do? What job am I going to get when this 10 years over? And it can be easy to forget that, you've built up a huge repertoire of knowledge and expertise. And, younger colleagues, less experienced people do benefit from that. It's really easy to trivialize how far you will have come.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So mentoring is a great avenue to sort of, swing the pendulum the other way, so to speak.
Right. Well, it goes both ways. You can seek mentorship, but it's quite possible you're already at the point where you could be someone's mentor. And it's worth bothering to do that. I realize it could take more time and more energy, but when you're giving back like that, you'd be surprised how energizing it can be for you. And when you see somebody who's young and fresh and excited, it feels good. You remember, oh yeah, I was like that, and I could still be like that. Why not? All right. Well, that's basically what I had prepared to say about this. Is there anything you'd like to add, Tom?
Well, I was thinking it's very easy to to get hung up on what we're doing, become singly focused on it. But and I'm guessing, I mean this in terms of how much you make science a central part of your identity and how much time you spend thinking about it when you're not at work. And an important learning process for me was realizing, I do better work when I don't put my science at the center of it. I guess putting it tritely, a change is as good as a rest. Now, unfortunately, when you put this into play in an academic setting, it can open yourself up to accusations of being, disinterested or not bothered. For me, and I'm just speaking for myself here, that was always ironic because I knew if I focused on it more, I would do less of a good job, realizing that I needed that freedom to explore other interests. That was more motivational. And it's on us as individuals to sort of think about that. On the flip side, I know people who worked kind of like 6.5 days a week and were fine with it and thrived on it, but it's not necessarily better. It's merely what works for you. And that is, gives me pause for thought anyway.
Right. In my personal background, I worked with engineers more than scientists as far as my day-to-day work. And I found that they, like scientists, can be very hardworking and work many, many hours. But there's a couple of guys that they had guitars in their cubicles. And, at a certain point every day, they'd be playing guitar. Now, it's an electric guitar that they got plugged in. They're only hearing it through their own headphones. So it's not like they're screaming metal out to the rest of the office. And two, they would, late at night, these guys would all stop and all start playing Carmageddon. This was back in the day. But that was, they had created a culture like that, and that brought them together. And they wanted, they didn't play that game until like 11 p.m. So it was motivating to stay in the office until Carmageddon time. So they had their advantages from that. Now, but too, I also did see people that work too hard and burn themselves out. So you've got to learn how to balance that. And it's like you're saying, some people need to have more outside interests than others. Some people can keep their nose to the grindstone and they can work 70-hour weeks and they're fine with it. Other people, 40 hours is enough. Thank you very much. I have other interests in my life, but those other interests play back into their scientific life.
Another point I was thinking of before coming in, into this podcast was, how do you separate us? So I'll backtrack. So we all work on something, or I'm sure the audience works on something that, it might be statistically impossible that you're going to achieve it, if it's a big scientific problem. Like for me, I was trying to solve the structures of membrane proteins. It's notoriously hard. They're not soluble in water, they don't crystallize. And how do you divorce that improbability from your own view of yourself as a scientist? Because the easy conclusion, the facile conclusion is, it's not work, therefore I'm bad. And I feel like that's a conclusion that's easy to draw in research. I don't know why, but it is. But I don't necessarily think it's that way. The two aren't necessarily connected. Many times it's a function of how many things you will try in the time that you have. And
sure.
Don't let people tell you otherwise.
Yeah, it's downright heroic to take on things where you're likely to fail over and over and over again before you maybe succeed. And it's not worthless. It's not useless to have those failures because they're still documented. It's still feeding the body of knowledge. This is not the way to get there. This is something that doesn't work. This is something that only gets this far and then hits this barrier, but it revealed the next barrier. That is highly useful. And we do tend to wrap our self-image into the work we do. And if the work doesn't have some definable success, we may not feel good. But it's, what are you defining as success? Is it it only counts if I win a Nobel Prize? Come on. There's plenty of small wins that are worthwhile, and you can use that for motivation too.
And you can bet the Nobel Prize winners and the very big scientists, I'm sure they were disinclined to celebrate their own achievements too at some point. I think that goes, right from working on the seemingly most trivial scientific problems to the things that do lead to awards. For example,
or they stumble into it. They accidentally find things.
Serendipity. We've not even touched upon that little gem. But just to back that up, I was just reading before coming into this. An astronaut, Christina Cook, her name is. She holds the record for the longest, time in space by a woman working in space on the International Space Station. And it says in the article, her impulse was to downplay the milestone before a former colleague reminded her that her achievement might give people a sense of greater possibilities. She's an astronaut on the NASA Artemis mission. And she thinks it's trivial what she does. So I think it's almost ubiquitous, that temptation to downplay. Maybe right. It's connected to scientists being naturally introverted. I don't know. I suspect that's some part of it, but it's not always a good thing to do. Celebrate your achievements, coming full circle with what we started.
Yeah, we've talked about imposter syndrome on the podcast on several occasions. We had one episode that was the sole topic, and it is easy to forget that you're not normal in a good way. That is, you've achieved a high level, and granted, you're used to being there now, but not many people are there with you. So give yourself a little credit. And it's not about being arrogant, or patting yourself on the back, but if you got a win, celebrate the win. It's why not?
Yeah, well, no one else is going to celebrate it for you. That's
right.
Something I've learned. You really have to make that happen.
Well, a lot of people won't even understand it well enough to celebrate it with you. They won't realize it's celebratory.
Also, with what you do, you will be working on some cool technology that becomes trivialized through your exposure to it. Looking back at what I did now, I got to go to particle accelerators, synchrotrons, and it seemed really trivial at the time. Yeah, I was at world-class, science facilities, and I'll never do it again. I've changed careers now, but I'm grateful for that experience because the things people will never see.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know that it's never. We'll see. It's not over yet. Something I noticed in the world of software development, which everybody's used to on the receiving end, but the version that you're using right now, that's not the version the engineers are working on. They're working on the next version. And then there's another group of them that are working on supporting people on the current version. And then there's another group of engineers who are working on supporting people who are not using the current version or using older versions for whatever reason. And you can look at that and say, well, wouldn't you hate that job because you don't get to do any of the cool new stuff? Like, there are solutions available at every level, and you get to participate in wherever you are. And you know what? In the moment, maybe this isn't your preferred space. You're working on something that's not terribly exciting to you, but it's got to be done. This is part of the grant. I'm junior in the lab, whatever it is. Fine, pay your dues and get yourself in a position where you do have more options. And that, again, can be motivating too. That's why you're dumping the trash and sweeping the floor.
And there's a flip side to that being junior is that everything's new, the techniques, are new, or, software engineering, as you say. So I came over from a core chemistry background, and molecular biology absolutely blew my mind. The idea that you can code and express antibiotic resistance genes to select, plasmids, which is bread and butter for most people in a bioscience lab. It was amazing, it blew me away.
Well, I remember the first time I heard about CRISPR, and I'm like, oh my God, that is unbelievable. And come to find out it's being used all the time. Or I mentioned to Nick at one point about cloning, how that just seemed like, space age science fiction. He's like, actually, it's kind of easy. We do it all the time.
It's funny putting it like that, isn't it? Do you think all the people working on CRISPR are just sick to the teeth of it because they're so overexposed?
Yeah, exactly. But when you're new to it, it's new to you. So
Yeah.
Awesome. You can use that too. A lot of this, it may seem like we're kind of faking ourselves out, kind of manipulating ourselves, but it's done with the best of intentions. So it's okay. It's okay to tell yourself a useful story. And if it helps you move forward, you recognize it's still just a story, but it's okay. As long as you maintain solid, good intent. That's your best friend when it comes to motivation. Get your intent straight, motivation will follow.
So don't forget, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the question section on the side of your screen. But I've got a few questions, Ken. You've touched upon some of them already, but maybe you can elaborate. So do you think it's always obvious when your motivation levels are dropping? Often we're suffering from tunnel vision, and it can be a steady thing, and perhaps imperceptible at first. And what would the telltale signs be if your motivation levels are waning?
Yeah. Well, I will first comment on the solution, and we'll take that apart. The solution is awareness. Just being aware of what you're up to, what you're feeling, what is happening around you makes all the difference. And that's when you'll see it showing up. Like, why am I tired? Oh yeah, because I'm bored. Why am I bored? Because this isn't interesting, and then you start to see what's at the base of it all. And these things are worthy of investigation. And I'm not saying you should do that all day long, because that takes you off track of actually accomplishing things. But periodically, you should just check in with yourself. How am I doing? How does this feel? What do I enjoy about this? What could be better about it? Look at both sides, and draw energy from the things that you already like about it. But when you see something that's lacking, well, now you know to take a look at that. Can I do something about that? And sometimes when you look at something, you realize there's nothing I can do about this. The task is the task. The grant is for what it's for. The PI is not going away. They're going to keep pushing for what they want. Okay, that's the environment. Accept it. When you fight against that, when you resist it, it costs you a lot of energy, and it can demotivate you in a serious way. Is there
So,
anything I can add there?
No. I think that's fairly comprehensive. So I think this will resonate with a lot of people. So you could be the most motivated person in the world, but what happens if you find yourself in an environment where a lot of your colleagues are, they're downbeat, unmotivated? That can kind of chip away at yourself. What would you recommend to stay resilient and should you try and reach out and up the general motivation of the lab, or
yeah, it's a matter of recognizing levels. So it's just like, well, people are a little downer here. Well, you know what? Suck it up, buttercup. Work it out. Be an example of being more upbeat. But in other cases, you look at it and go, this place is a cesspool. This place is a disaster. And you have to look at that and go, you know what? Maybe I need to make a change. Now, you don't want to go straight there every time. And maybe in your lifetime, you will never go there. You'll never think, I have to get out of here. But at a certain point, you can look at things and go, you know what? This is an unfixable place. This environment is too damaged for me to do what I need to do. And it isn't even a matter of judgment. Of judging other people, saying, oh, the environment is bad in a moral sense. It's that the environment is bad for me. And recognizing the difference is quite useful.
No, I agree. It's just, from my experience, it can be hard, because a lot of scientists, maybe all of us, fear of failure is a big motivation. We don't like to quit on things. A lot of people stick out their tenure, for the completionist sake, and very noble aims. But at some point, the rubber does hit the road if you're in a really awful environment.
Right. And we've had several episodes talking about this from different directions. Like in an example is you, Tom, that you were in a lab, but now you're in an adjacent area. You're involved with scientific content, which could only be done by somebody with your kind of experience and background. But it's a choice that you made for this point in your career, and hopefully it's been a happy change from what you did last. And what you did last, you probably enjoyed until it was time to move on,
Yeah. No, it's very much the case. Deciding what you want to do in perpetuity as well. For me, crystallizing membrane for a living, but that doesn't make it a worthless pursuit. Doing it was very useful.
Yeah, it's like what happens in business. Some businesses are pop-up businesses, right? There's an opportunity, they take it to the end, and then they shut it down and move on to the next thing. Others are far more permanent. Now, you got to look at how you want to structure your career. For some people, taking short-term opportunities and maximizing them repeatedly is a career plan. For other people, it's I want to get into this lab, or I want to stay in the lab I've always been in until I retire with a gold watch. Fine, that is perfectly viable. Also, it's just we want to watch out for is like, you know what? All I care about is tenure. It doesn't matter. This place sucks, but tenure is worth it. So, do you really want that to be your career path? Now, I won't even say that it's a wrong choice, but I'm saying if you're going to make that choice, make it on purpose. Make it with your eyes open.
I'll second that and say that was something I came to realize. I was on the academic road, and I couldn't see myself in a PI position for many reasons. That's another conversation. But if you don't want that, I began to ask myself, is it worthwhile me staying in research? Because in the end, I'll just become a very expensive postdoc researcher, very expensive to be employed. So that was part of the motivation for leaving. But like you say, it has to be a personal decision. But it's quite empowering when you make it.
Oh, for sure. And you can judge for yourself too of what are the factors that really matter. Is there some moral imperative in your choice? for some people that is top of mind. For other people, like this is just numbers. I will advance better on this path, or I will earn more of a living on this path. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Taking care of your family is a noble cause. And if you can do it and still be in science, well, cool. If your top priority isn't, I want to be, Dr. Jonas Salk. I want to discover the next Cheerio. I mean, whatever it is, for some people, that is absolutely what they want, and power to them, because it's hard to be a discoverer. It's hard to go into that great unknown, and if you can stay motivated for that, God bless. Please do, because we need you. There aren't that many people that can do that.
On that note, I mean, I don't have any more questions to put, Canada. If you have anything else you want to say, or
no, I think that was a well-rounded discussion. I'm so thrilled that we got to do this together, Tom.
We should do it again.
We only cross paths occasionally here at Bitesize Bio, so it's awesome when we do.
Ships in the night, or Halley's Comet, or something. Yeah, okay. So I think we'll call it there today, folks. Thanks, Ken, for your insight, and thanks everybody in the audience, whether you're live now or watching on demand in the future. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to The Happy Scientist on your favourite podcast platform or on YouTube. If you like, listen back to our early episodes, which are packed with useful wisdom. And of course, tell your colleagues so we can help spread the Happy Scientist. Also, look out for more live Happy Scientist episodes in the coming months. You can find them listed on events.bitesizebio.com and the Happy Scientist Facebook page at facebook.com/Happy Scientist. Until then, good luck in your research and goodbye from all of us at Bitesize Bio, including Mr. Miyagi, Kenneth Vogt.
And maybe we'll hear from Tom again in the future.
I hope so.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.